Welcome back. It's Friday, 8 September. It looks like we'll dodge Hurricane Lee. Hopefully it swings north and leaves us. One thing we'll do is post the Module 1 assessment for your first attempt of the Module 1 assessment after we complete our review of learning outcomes from Chapter 2 today. Then, as we review our items from that assessment on Monday, so everybody has to have your first attempt logged by 1 p.m. Monday. After we review the greatest challenges on that assessment, we're going to take up a segment to work up another round or a bonus added benefit, hands-on. We'll take your solution results, and then in each case, I'll work one-on-one with you to refine. We'll take some quick examples generically for everybody to understand, but then since everyone's home environment, home network is different, you'll be applying specific measures in each of your home network environments so that it'll be more reliable and more secure. So that comes after the assessment. I have noticed that some of you have not completed some of the assignments yet. So the 1.2 assignment, the 1.3 assignment, and we need you to go ahead and wrap that up and get that in. So what we'll do today is explain the milestones in cybersecurity, some of the major events that have happened, and then demonstrate practical methods for how to secure things, explain why a successful information security program is the shared responsibility of the entire organization. This is the meat of Chapter 2. List and describe the threats posed to information security and common attacks associated with those. So we're going to blitz today. There's going to be a lot of very quick information. It's a good thing we're recording this, but basically it's the main points of the slides from Chapter 2. And then finally, we'll list the common information security issues that result from poor software development efforts. So you'll remember that effective cybersecurity involves hardware, it involves software, networking, and we'll dive deeper there. So let's get started here. We've just covered that. Let's take a look at the need for information security. We do know that we've been talking about this for a while. The threat of attacks on information systems is a constant concern. It used to be that organizations had could operate without the use of technology. Now that technology is a part of how we work every day, it means that exposures to our technology can impact our resources, our assets. We talked about assets in our last session. One of the best ways to start a discussion and to frame an effective information security program is to identify your assets, right? So that's one thing that we don't really spend a lot of time doing. We're worried about people getting into our Kool-Aid, but so what if they do? If there's nothing in terms of information on your home network, then you don't have any worries. But what if you do online banking? Does anyone here, go ahead and unmute your mic if this is true. Does anyone in our class do their banking online? Any volunteers? I do my banking online. So if I have information assets about my bank account in my online environment in my home, that's one reason why I need to be more concerned. Okay. Basically, a proper program, a well-framed program, involves these four important functions: protecting the organization's ability to operate, right? So if you can't operate, you can't conduct business. Let's pretend that you're a restaurant and you have everything you need to serve exceptional cuisine. But for one reason or another, you can't accept cash, and then your credit card machine is out. What do you do then? Do you operate your kitchen and then take people's information so that eventually you can get money from them? How long would you stay in business, right? So data and information, protecting the data and information the organization collects and uses. If you look at the university, there's information about you as students we're supposed to protect. The federal government requires that we protect your privacy. It's called FERPA. There's a law. Enabling the safe operation of applications running in the organization's IT systems. So I had an example here. Here is an example of an application that was installed so that we can play video clips. And you'll notice that this one install option that's selected by default, when you load it, it says, oh, I want to be able to allow metadata network access and to check for VLC updates. Well, yeah, updated software is more secure, but what about the metadata network access? What does that mean? What kind of data are they getting access to? A lot of times, organizations simply don't assess more about this. In your solution, you were asked to issue some commands to collect information about your personal technology, which may have exposures on the network because of some of the applications like this that are installed. Okay. Of course, safeguarding the organization's technology assets is an interest. So business needs first. So oftentimes we get into big trouble as cybersecurity professionals if we walk into a place and say, oh, you need a $5,000 firewall, and maybe that's not something that tracks with the needs of the business, right? So when security needs and business needs collide, business wins. What we're saying is that if you do anything in terms of cybersecurity and it conflicts with or creates overhead that the users don't like a very long password, then what will happen is that people will take shortcuts just to go ahead and keep the business wheels turning. And this is one source of needless conflict that can undermine or degrade a cybersecurity program in an organization. It's true that the underlying business generates revenue and uses the information. So the whole point is that cybersecurity has to support the business process. And this is really important. The experts come in and they say, we're going to fix your problem, and they create all sorts of problems if they don't consider the business process first. Oftentimes, it's the people who are working in the trenches in the business that understand more about how things are done, and they're the ones to consult with. It's not the lead, it's not the managers, it's not the senior administration, but it's the folks in the trenches that you need to have a conversation with. The key is to balance the needs of the organization with the need to protect the information assets, realizing that business needs come first. Put another way, if you have to disrupt the business process to install and configure security measures, then maybe you're not choosing the right security measures. See? So this seems like the whole course is about an effective cybersecurity program and the essentials of cybersecurity. And it starts with the business. And this is one of those things that's overlooked. And if you're doing anything that disrupts the business, it's time to step back and rethink things. That's how you get the business owners and the business employees to support you. But the moment you start enforcing things or implementing changes that are disruptive, you're going to have a bigger problem on your hands. The business employees are going to be against you, and there's no way you're going to have an effective program that way. Given that thought, does anyone have any comments or observations to share based on the information we just presented? Okay. Can someone unmute your microphone so we know you're still there?
Yeah, we're still here. We're still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so we talked about communities of interest, right? All three communities of interest are responsible for facilitating security programs. Implementing information security has more to do with management than technology. And so the technical side is actually pretty easy to do, but it's the management side. One thing that we're going to share with you before the end of this course is something called role-based access control, where the management has to tell you, what role does this employee play? What information do they access? And you create a security profile based on the role. When their roles change, all you do is change their membership to a single security group, and then everything goes from there. This is one of the biggest Achilles heels in cybersecurity, is that you don't have a conversation with the management about who's doing what. And then you have a conversation with those people who are actually doing it. You'd be shocked at how often you find out some managers really don't have a clue about what their employees are responsible for handling. So that's important information when you're figuring out how to protect functionality. Communities of interest should address information security in terms of business impact and cost of business interruption, rather than isolating security as a technical problem. There's a great measure that's very effective. It's called a downtime procedure. We just talked about what happens in a restaurant. What do you do in a restaurant if all of a sudden you're only using credit cards and then you can't have access to the credit cards? How do you handle that, right? If you have a sense that you need to prepare for that, maybe it's as simple as having a little form that's pre-printed where you take like the credit card number and the security code, and when you get your terminal back, you can enter the amount on those things, right? So you can have a manual process. It's called a downtime procedure, where you use good old-fashioned pen and paper, right? And that could be something that you do if the business is interrupted. It's more cost-effective than having like backup payment systems. But let's talk about a backup payment system. Has anyone ever seen a little kiosk? It's a little terminal, and it's called Clover, right? Or what's the other one that's real popular? Square. Has anyone ever seen like a vendor that has like a little square thing, and they connect it to their tablet or they connect it to their smartphone, and now they can swipe a card? Have you ever seen that?
No, but the closest thing I've seen to that is like a QR code that you can scan to be able
Yes.
to like PayPal or something like that.
Yes. So that's a great example of a backup where you set up something with PayPal and it's a QR code. And what do? Well, here's the QR code. Here's how you pay for your meal, right? So people walk up and they use their own smartphone. And then you can tell whether or not you're good. So if worse comes to worse, you want to think about business interruption. And you want to do it as a team. You don't want to think exclusively about the hacking. That's the bigger challenge, is that people don't understand the process and the people as much as the techie stuff. Protecting data that organizations collect and use. So there are some legal requirements. There are laws that require that certain types of data have to be protected while they're being transmitted, while they're being processed, when they're at rest in storage. And that's a good holistic way of thinking about the data. If I'm transmitting the data, how is it protected? If I'm processing the data, how is it protected? When it's at rest and it's on a disk, where is that disk stored? Does anybody have physical access to it? Right? Databases are a gold mine. So we're going to spend some special time talking about database security. Databases are sort of like the most sensitive and important information, digital information, and it's all tightly condensed. If you hack a database, you get all the digital information that really matters. So that's why databases have a huge bullseye on them. So database security is very, very serious stuff. When you're talking about software applications, right? Many times the people who use the software need to be more involved and not just the techs. So the IT department has some role to play, but it's really the management and users that have to take a look at what's going on. When you have a new update, if you load this, sometimes there are bugs in the update. The only people that are going to know if there are bugs in the update are the people that are using the software. If the software has to do with something the techs know nothing about, they're not going to understand. Again, you can't leave the users out of the loop. So you want to take an update, load it on one machine, ask the folks who use the software, can you do everything? Here's a great case in point. Did you know that payroll software is specialized application software? Payroll. It's a whole category all by itself. So if you have a business and you have employees, the odds are pretty good that you're not going to come up with your own payment system. You're going to use an app. And if that's not running, who would like to work for a business where you come for paydays? Friday, I get my weekly paycheck on Friday. No, we're having a problem with our pay app. We'll get it to you Monday. How long would you continue working in an environment like that? Right? That's where the people who process the payroll are the ones that have to be in the loop. So it's a partnership between the users and the tech folks. And it's important that it's not relegated to the IT department. You would think that it is, but it can't be. And this is one aspect of application security that, you know, it's an all hands on deck kind of process. Organizations must employ secure infrastructure hardware appropriate to the size and scope of the enterprise. Additional services may be needed as the organization grows. Growth is a huge challenge. So you find out that the same old tech doesn't work. In fact, we're going to talk about a very simple scenario where you have servers, but then when the organization grows past a point, you really need an enterprise environment. You need an Active Directory domain where you can centrally manage things as the organization grows. A lot of people don't do that because they think it's too expensive. But the trade-offs are you're a lot less secure and you're a lot more exposed because you have more employees depending on a few machines. And I see this over and over again in the US Virgin Islands and all over the Caribbean. Organizations are successful and they grow, and as they grow, they don't plan how to phase in the right kind of infrastructure and security up front. More robust solutions should replace security programs the organization has outgrown. So you may have to forklift some things you used to do out of there. IT continues to add new capabilities and methods that allow organizations to solve business information management challenges. So there's new infrastructure, new applications, new cool stuff all the time. The thing to remember is that every time you add new hardware, add new apps, add new web features, somebody has to be looking at it to see if it's secure and if it works like it's supposed to. All right, let's take a short pause. And what we're going to do now is pivot and talk about threats and attacks. Okay. So we're going to stop talking about the organization and we're going to talk about the bad guys. Any questions before we jump into this topic?
No.
So a threat is defined as a potential risk to an asset's loss of value. Now that's a generic definition. It means that a hurricane is considered to be a threat. It's not that a hurricane would attack your data, but it's a threat to your data. Because a hurricane could be a potential risk to an asset's value if a hurricane could disrupt your access to that critical information. Does everybody understand what I'm saying here? A threat is a slightly different idea, and it's broader. And what I want you to understand is that it's not always an active person, or it's not always malicious software. Sometimes it's an environmental thing. An attack is an intentional or unintentional act that can damage or otherwise compromise information. An exploit is a technique used to compromise a system. I would revise that understanding so that an exploit is a technique used to take advantage of an exposure. All right, so you can't compromise a system unless there's an exposure that can be exploited. So an exploit is a method to take advantage of a specific exposure. And that's one change from the textbook definition that I'd like you to understand. Vulnerability is a potential weakness in an asset or its defensive control systems. So when you have those exposures and there's an exploit that matches, now it's a vulnerability, okay? So an exposure matched with an exploit means, okay, now you're vulnerable. Management must be informed about the various threats to an organization's people, application, data, and information systems. Overall security is improving, but the number of potential hackers is growing. There are many people who want to make a living, except that they don't always have the options to work in a business environment. What does it matter? They can hack your bank account from home and their bunny slippers, they can make money, right? So this is one thing that I would advise on slide 11. You want to be able to map the definitions, the terms for the definitions on either side of this. So you want to be able to choose which definition tracks with which term. Any questions about this before we continue? So this is just a recap of the same thing we just covered, right? You want to be able to match. There will be a matching challenge on your assessment. So world internet usage. What you're going to find is that there are haves and have-nots. And in many cases, many of our hackers are coming from regions in the world where the population isn't using the internet as much, but people are hungry. People need a good way to make a lucrative living, right? Make a nice living. So you'll notice the populations here, the total population, and this is as of 2022, we have about 8 billion people. And when you look at the internet users, it's very clear that some continents have a much higher rate of internet usage and growth. And because of that, more of their population is exposed, okay? So the percentage of worldwide internet use, Asia takes 52.2% of internet resources, right? Africa, 11.7, North America is 6.9%. And so that's not a very high percentage when you think about it. The growth between 2000 and 2020 is also significant. So Middle East and Africa, their growth rates are exploding. They are off the charts. When you look at North America, we're growing by 200% in a 20-year period. And this is 12,000, more than 12,000%. So there are many new users on the internet, and that poses a challenge. Okay. This is just good information to have. Do I expect you to know this and be able to answer assessment items on this? No, not really. But this is an interesting slide right here. Okay. So from employees or internal stakeholders, the inability or unwillingness to follow established policy. Yeah, I'm going to write my password on a sticky note. I'm going to put it on my monitor because I keep my office door locked. What are you talking about? Your office door is locked sometimes, but other times the cleaning staff are in there. And what are they going to see when they open up your office to clean the office? A sticky note with your password, right? Disclosure due to insufficient training. So what's the greatest cause that you see here? Theft of mobile, laptop, and tablets. That's huge. What's the greatest threat in terms of employees and internal stakeholders? The loss of mobile devices and laptops. Oh, that was the first slide. Blackmail or information release or sales. I think I'm reading this table incorrectly. Let's go back. So 1 is not a threat, 5 is a severe threat. I guess we need to be looking at this column here instead. Disclosure due to insufficient training is pretty high. Let's see what the next slide shows. Yeah, that's the highest one. So in terms of employees and internal stakeholders, disclosure due to insufficient training, education, awareness, and training, right? And then the inability or unwillingness to follow. So here's where they don't know better, and here's where they know better, but they do wrong anyway. Those are the top 2 issues. And I know better, but I do it anyway is number 1. So number 1 and number 2 are I know better, but I do it anyway versus I don't know better. The only way that's going to change is if you take people who know better and they do it anyway, and you hurt them in terms of their job and career path. If you don't have policy and discipline within the environment to take people who break the rules and put everyone else at risk, and then make an example of them, then everybody else will do it. If you have policies you do not enforce, if you have leadership that don't think that surfing porn and infecting your information systems is important, your information systems will be infected all the time. Okay? So, yeah, those 2 things are the most prominent. And that's according to a study in 2015. Now here it talks about outsiders or external stakeholders. I've included some additional information in the resources and references folder. And in here, let's see. Everybody still with us?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's just a series of graphics, insider versus outside. For insiders, remember that it's, I know better, but I'm going to break the rules anyway. That's the number 1 greatest problem for insiders. And the second greatest problem for insiders is I don't know better, right? I'm not trained. As far as outsiders, so this is a helpful set of graphics where it talks about the differences between internal and external sources. Contractors, that's a huge one. You'll have partners that work with you in an organization, and sometimes it's the outside people who work with you that have nasty stuff on their tech, and it affects you, right? We see movies where the hackers take over the world, so that is an external thing, but it's not very common. It's really more cyber criminals who are out to get money. It's really the driving factor, right? So industrial espionage and so on. So economic gain, corporate espionage, outsider threats. Insider threats. You can pass a thumb drive on to somebody and get paid. The competition wants the data on your organization. And believe it or not, there are people on the outside of organizations, your competitors, that are willing to do that, right? Or maybe it's about getting promoted faster, so it's for personal advantage, and there's insider threats that have to do with hacking. Or professional revenge. You don't like someone on the job, so you want to discredit them, right? These are just helpful, quick graphical representations of insider threats versus outside threats. Competition sponsored attackers, right? Most of it has to do with money. That's the big thing to remember. Methods they use, right? Social engineering means you are an imposter. When you socially engineer, you are posing as something you are not. So you tell a coworker, oh, your job requires you to have access to this information because you do so-and-so. And that's all fabricated. You're just posing to be in your job responsibility that you're going to require that information. Oh, yeah, I work with finances, right? I'm working on the budget, so I have to have access to the financial stuff. Privilege abuse. So when somebody says, I can't work because I'm not the administrator of the machine, I have to load my own software, and they give someone administrative privileges, that's a huge problem. This one is one of my favorites, the malicious USB drops. So you have to train your employees that if somebody leaves a thumb drive behind on the floor or in the parking lot, you do not plug that into your system. So if you're walking around and you see something like this laying on the ground, you take it to your security team or your IT people, and they plug it into an isolated station to make sure it's not infected. That's what's supposed to happen. Or you have one of these and you just lose it and it's loaded with data. That's physical theft, right? So somebody sees it and they take it. Malicious insiders. Look at the cost of malicious insiders. So these are hateful people that work in your own environment. They're the greatest cause of problems in terms of cost. And then when it comes to outside cyber attacks, the greatest source of problems are viruses, worms, and Trojans, malware, right? So what is your greatest business threat? Both, right? Insiders and outsiders. And every case is different, but it's important to take a look at those things. Most likely root causes of data breaches: careless insider, malicious or criminal insider, external hacker, combined insider and external hackers, right? So they found out not too long ago that somebody was hacking banks, and they were getting into the banks, into the accounts, and nobody understood how that was happening because they had very good firewalls, very good network security. Turns out that this ring of hackers for organized crime were hiring people to walk into the bank to pretend to be interested in mortgage loans and savings accounts, and just walk around in the bank with a device in their purse or a device in their backpack. And if they had like a book bag with that device in it, all they had to do was walk inside the bank and the bank was hacked. So the hackers from overseas were putting electronic payments in the accounts of people who would get a package and they'd say, put this in your book bag and go into this bank and you'll get paid. And they were doing it, right? Had everybody stumped. It was a ring that was really successful and they were draining hundreds of millions of dollars and the FBI got involved. And then they finally figured out, oh, it's not the outside or the inside, it's both, right? All right. Let's pivot back to our slides. I want you to note that most of what's important or relevant for the rest of chapter 2 slides is embedded in the study guide. So if we do not finish all of the slides from chapter 2 today, that basically the most important slides and the most important information are found in the study guide. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on many of these very detailed charts. This is good information to understand, especially where the severe threat is concerned. It's good to have a look at these. So there is something called TTP, Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures. Your author uses the acronym CAPEC, Common Attack Pattern Enumeration and Classification. It's kind of like a fingerprint. There are certain methods used to attack vulnerable systems and networks, and that's a recognizable pattern. So it's kind of like a fingerprint. If it's an individual that's doing this, they call that TTP, Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures, right? So a hacker has a certain flair or a certain signature series of moves and methods. And oftentimes you can identify which hacker is involved based on what happened in the system. So this has actually become quite sophisticated. They've collected this information and there's an online repository where you can reference and research these things. So sometimes it's just a question of matching what happened to the database here. So MITRE is the organization that has collected this information. So, and MITRE also compiles a database called CVEs, Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. So this is a very good way to go. What I'd like you to do next is, and I tell you what, in the interest of time here, I'd like to finish the 12 categories of threats just briefly on Monday, and then I'd like to take up and revisit our solution on Monday, so sort of a round 2 for the solution on Monday. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments, observations based on the information we've shared today? All right, so we'll take up on Monday just a quick review of each of the 12 categories of threats, and then we'll spend time working further to get more benefit out of the solution. So you should have your screens, your laptops, your home network in the mix on Monday. By the time we hit 1:30, we want to spend the rest of the time showing and sharing some ways to take the results and then make improvements in your network. Thanks for joining us. That's all we have today. We'll sign off for now. Have a great weekend.